I found out my so-called divorced boyfriend was still living with his wife. Instead of screaming or walking away, I smiled, stayed quiet, and set a trap so petty and perfect it would make him lose his mind. All built around one ridiculous pop song. I'll never forget the exact moment it happened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't one of those screaming matches you see in movies. It came quietly, slipped into my life like a whisper in the dark. I was sitting in the back office of my bakery, long after closing. The air was still warm from the ovens, the faint smell of cinnamon rolls and yeast clinging to everything, and my feet ached from 12 hours of standing. I had taken off my apron, but the flour dust clung stubbornly to my shirt, to my hair, to my skin. My phone buzzed, and at first I thought nothing of it. Probably a reminder, a supplier, maybe even him. But when I picked it up and read the message, my whole world shifted. I think you should know. I'm his wife. My breath caught in my throat. I read it once, then again, my eyes refusing to believe what they were seeing. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack. For a few long seconds, I actually convinced myself it was some sort of mistake. Wrong number, wrong woman, some cruel prank. But then I kept reading. She used his name. She said it with such certainty that denial became impossible. The word wife seemed to echo in the small room. It was absurd. He had told me from the very beginning that he was divorced, not separated, not working on it. Divorced. Clean cut. He'd looked me in the eyes with that steady, charming smile of his and said he was starting fresh, moving on, ready for something new. And God help me, I believed him. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just sting. It feels like being gutted. I couldn't breathe. My stomach twisted into knots. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. For the first time in my life, I realized heartbreak could be physical. It wasn't just sadness, it was pain. Cold, sharp pain that made me feel hollow. I thought I'd react with fury, that I'd be the kind of woman who screamed into the phone, who stormed into his house, who made a scene. But instead, I sat there in silence. I felt like I had been pushed outside my own body, watching myself from above, too shocked to move. The only words I could manage were whispered over and over. No, 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 no. Like saying it enough times could rewind reality. But reality doesn't rewind. I scrolled further down the message. The woman, Claire, though I wouldn't know her name until later, explained just enough to shatter me. She and he were still together, not just legally, but physically, domestically. Sharing a house, sharing a bed, living as husband and wife while I played the part of his shiny new distraction. Worse, she wasn't even surprised. She told me it wasn't the first time. He had cheated before, spun little webs of lies, convinced other women he was free, and she had caught him, forgiven him, tried to rebuild. But seeing my name pop up in his texts again was the breaking point. I didn't even know what to say to her. My throat was dry, my brain buzzing like static. Part of me wanted to apologize to her, like I had done something wrong, like I had been a homewrecker without knowing. But she stopped me before the words could form. She said, "Don't. This isn't on you. It's on him. You didn't lie to me. He did." And in that moment, something inside me cracked open. I burst into tears. Because she was right. I hadn't lied. I hadn't schemed. I had been played just as much as she had been. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, his face looping in my head like a cruel film reel. His smile, his laugh. The way he used to bring takeout to the bakery when he knew I'd had a long day. The way he tucked my hair behind my ear. All of it poisoned now, tainted with the truth that he'd been giving someone else those same looks, those same gestures. I grieved. That's the only word for it. I grieved like someone had died. Because the man I thought I knew, the man I thought I loved, wasn't real. He was a ghost, a mask, a performance. But grief is strange. It shifts, it hardens, it changes shape. By the dawn, when the first light crept across my walls, the tears were gone. What replaced them was a cold, simmering fury. Not the kind that burns out fast, the kind that lingers, the kind that sharpens. The next morning, I called her. My hands shook dialing the number, but when she answered, her voice was steady, almost practiced, like she had rehearsed this conversation in her head. We talked for hours. She filled in the blanks, and suddenly every weird little inconsistency in my relationship made sense. The sudden disappearances, the vague excuses, the defensiveness whenever I asked to meet his friends. It all clicked into place like a puzzle I hadn't realized I was working on. And when she laughed bitterly and sharply and said, "You know what he reminds me of? That stupid song, Mambo number 5. Little bit of Manica, little bit of Erica, little bit of Tina, little bit of Rita." I actually laughed too, even though my chest still felt like it had been split open. Because she was right. That is exactly who he was. A man collecting women like verses in a cheesy pop song, rotating them in and out like background music, thinking he was clever enough to keep the beat going forever. That's when the seed of an idea planted itself. Small at first, ridiculous even, but it grew quickly, curling and twisting in my mind like ivy. If he wanted to live like the man in that song, then I'd make sure that song was the last soundtrack he ever wanted to hear. I didn't confront him right away. That was the hardest part. Every time he kissed me, every time he sent a sweet text, every time he swore he was busy with work when I knew exactly where he really was, it made my skin crawl. But I forced myself to smile, to play along, to tuck away the anger and wear a mask of my own. Because revenge is like baking. You can't pull the kick out of the oven too early. You have to let it rise, let it bake all the way through, or it collapses. I wasn't going to let this collapse. So I waited, I planned, and I realized something delicious. I didn't have to do it alone.
At first, it was almost too easy. He fell for the bait like a fish, grabbing at every shiny hook dangled in the water. A new message would come in from Monica or Rita or Erica, and he'd respond with the same tired charm he had used on me. Sweet words, promises, little lies stacked one on top of another. Reading his replies through the accounts Claire and I controlled made me sick and amused all at once. Sick because this was the same man who had looked into my eyes and told me he loved me. Amused because I could see him walking right into the trap without hesitation. We kept it subtle in the beginning, just little messages here and there, nothing too obvious. Monica would tell him she missed him. Erica would send a photo of her drink and say she wished he were there. Rita would say she couldn't stop thinking about him, and his responses were predictable. Flirty, cocky, smug. He really thought he had multiple women chasing him, each one hanging on his every word. It inflated him. I could almost feel his ego swelling through the screen. And I played my part too. In real life, I was still the dutiful girlfriend, smiling when he came to the bakery, laughing at his jokes, letting him kiss me like nothing was wrong. Every time he touched me, my skin crawled, but I held it together because the beauty of this plan was patience. The longer it simmered, the more delicious the outcome would be. But slowly, as the weeks went by, we began to crank up the heat. The messages started overlapping. 2 different women texting him at the same time, each expecting his attention. Monica asking why he hadn't replied yet, while Erica sent a suggestive photo. Rita saying she was jealous. Sandra accusing him of pulling away. His replies grew shorter, sharper, more frantic. He tried to juggle them, but I could tell he was slipping. One night, I sat next to him on the couch while he typed furiously on his phone. His face was tight, his jaw clenched. I asked him what was wrong, pretending to be innocent, and he muttered something about work. Work. At 9 p.m. on a Saturday. I almost laughed out loud, but I bit my tongue, sipped my tea, and watched as the little trap tightened around him. Claire and I got bolder. We started weaving the actual lyrics of Mambo Number 5 into the messages, just enough to make him squirm. Monica, I need you in my life, baby, just a little bit. Rita, you're driving me crazy, can't get enough. Erica, by my side tonight, right? He still didn't notice the pattern, not at first, but he started to show cracks. He grew paranoid, distracted. He'd show up at my bakery looking restless, snapping at small things. Once, when the oven timer beeped too loudly, he jumped like a gun had gone off. He started checking his phone constantly, slipping it into his pocket when I glanced his way. He'd excuse himself to the bathroom at dinner just to respond to the phantom women demanding his time. I watched him unravel, and it was intoxicating. Every little sign of stress on his face felt like payback. Every sleepless night he had was one I had already lived through because of him. And Claire, she was thriving. For the first time in years, she felt like she was back in control. She told me she hadn't laughed this much in a decade. We even gave ourselves little nicknames. She was DJ Mambo, orchestrating the chaos. I was number 5, the quiet shadow pulling strings. Together, we were turning his life into a song he couldn't escape. The turning point came one night when Tina, one of our newest creations, sent him a message that simply said, "I only have eyes for you." Within minutes, Monica texted him, "Why are you ignoring me? Am I not enough?" Erica, "You better not be talking to someone else." Rita piled on, "You promised me I was the only one." His phone lit up over and over, buzzing on the table like a wasp trapped in a jar. He looked panicked, sweating, typing frantically, trying to calm them all down. And I just sat there across from him, sipping wine, watching the performance like it was the best theater I'd ever seen. The stress started to bleed into his real life. He became sloppy with me, forgetting what lies he'd told, mixing up names. Once he accidentally called me Monica under his breath. I froze, let the silence hang heavy, then tilted my head and asked, "Who's Monica?" The way his face drained of color was almost worth all the heartbreak. He scrambled, mumbling something about a coworker, but I just smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, okay." I let him think he'd gotten away with it, but inside I was giddy. The plan was working. Claire and I pushed harder. We made the women clingier, needier, more demanding. They began asking for proof. Selfies. Phone calls. Promises. He tried to dodge, but we kept tightening the noose. At one point, Sandra sent him a voice note, courtesy of a text-to-speech program we'd found online, saying, "I can't stop thinking about you, baby." He nearly dropped his phone when he heard it. He started losing sleep. He told me once that he kept having nightmares, that he felt like people were watching him. He said it half joking, but I could see the fear in his eyes. And oh, how satisfying it was to watch him drown in the very game he tried to play with us. The best part? He had no idea that his real wife was in on it. That the woman he came home to every night, the one who folded his laundry and cooked his dinners, was helping build the prison of paranoia he was trapped inside. He had no idea that when he vented to her about feeling stressed, she had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. But paranoia has a way of building momentum. It wasn't enough for him to juggle the fake women. He started to slip up in real life, too. He'd cancel plans with me last minute, saying he was busy, but then text me 10 minutes later like he forgot he'd canceled. He'd leave the house at odd hours, muttering excuses to Claire that didn't add up. He was chasing shadows, trying to keep all his lies afloat, and the harder he tried, the faster they sank. And then finally came the night I had been waiting for. The night where all the little cracks we'd carved into his perfect facade split wide open. It started with a fight between him and Monica. She accused him of lying, of cheating on him with someone else. He panicked, tried to calm her down, but Erica jumped in, demanding answers. Rita chimed in next, then Sandra. 4 different women blowing up his phone at once, each one furious, each one convinced they're being betrayed. His screen was a storm of notifications, his fingers flying desperately to keep up. And I watched him from across the couch, my face calm, my voice sweet, asking if he wanted popcorn for the movie we'd supposedly been watching. Inside, though, my heart raced. This was it. The unraveling. The moment the man who thought he was untouchable realized he was anything but. And when his phone buzzed again, and he muttered under his breath, "This is a frickin' nightmare," I smiled into my glass of wine. Because he was right, and the nightmare had only just begun.
I could feel it in my bones. The man was circling the drain. His paranoia had reached a fever pitch, and every new message we sent through the fake women pushed him closer to collapse. He was unraveling in front of me, and yet he still thought he was in control. That arrogance was the last thing to go, and I wanted to be there when it shattered. Claire and I had agreed early on that there had to be a finale, something undeniable, a moment where all the threads came together and tied around his throat like a bow. It couldn't just be endless texting and paranoia. We wanted something public, something he couldn't walk away from with excuses. So we planned carefully, choosing the day, the time, the place. It was poetic, really, that it all went down in my bakery. He had promised to come by one Saturday morning to help out. In reality, he never lifted a finger, but he liked to sit at the counter, sip coffee, and pretend he was supporting me. That day, Claire and I orchestrated the perfect storm. Each fake woman would send him increasingly desperate, angry messages, all within the span of an hour. Their accusations would overlap, their words sharpen to cut. And just when he thought he couldn't take any more, the final blow would land. The morning started innocently enough. He strolled in, kissed me on the cheek, and settled onto his usual stool. I poured him coffee, smiling like the doting girlfriend, while my phone buzzed in my apron pocket with updates from Claire. The women were already at it. Monica accusing him of ghosting her, Erica saying she knew he was lying, Rita demanding proof he was serious about her. He shifted in his seat, pulling his phone out every few minutes, his face tightening with each new notification. Customers came and went, oblivious to the storm brewing in that little bakery. The smell of fresh bread hung in the air, sunlight streamed through the windows, and behind the counter, the man who thought he was untouchable was sweating bullets. He muttered under his breath, cursed softly, and tapped furiously at his screen. At one point, he looked up at me, his smile forced, his eyes wild, and said, "Sorry, work's being crazy." Work. Always work. If only he knew that I knew. Then it happened. The grand finale. Claire, using the Monica account, sent the message we'd been saving. "I know about the others. You've been playing me just like you played Erica and Rita and Sandra and Tina. You think you're clever, but you're not. You're pathetic." Within seconds, the other women chimed in. Erica, "So I'm not the only one?" "Wow." Rita, "You're disgusting." Sandra, "Hope your wife knows what you've been doing." One after another, the notifications flooded his phone until he couldn't ignore it anymore. His hands shook as he typed, his lips moving silently, trying to come up with excuses fast enough. And that's when Claire herself walked in. I had invited her, of course, under the pretense of dropping by for coffee. She strolled through the door like any other customer, her hair neat, her expression calm. But when her eyes landed on him, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He froze, his face draining of color, his phone slipping from his hand onto the counter with a clatter. The customers glanced up, sensing tension, but nobody moved. She walked right up to him, her voice steady, clear, carrying across the room. "So, how's your harem of women doing? Monica, Rita, Erica, Sandra, how many more, huh?" The room silent. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline surging through me. He stammered, tried to stand, tried to smile like it was all a joke, but his words tangled in his throat. I don't... Claire, it's not what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think," she snapped, her eyes blazing. She pulled out her phone, holding up the screen with the messages, the proof. "Do you want me to read them out loud, or should I let everyone here enjoy the show?"
He reached for her arm, panicked, but she yanked it away. Customers were staring now, whispering amongst themselves, some with wide eyes, some with smirks. The man who had built his life on lies was exposed, standing in the middle of my bakery with nowhere to run. And I stood behind the counter, smiling sweetly, my hands folded like I was watching a performance I had already seen rehearsed. When his eyes finally landed on me, pleading, desperate, I tilted my head and said softly, "She's not wrong, you know. You lied to me, too." The look on his face was pure devastation. In that moment, I think he realized the walls had closed in completely. There was no escape, no smooth words, no clever lie that could save him. He was cornered, stripped bare, caught in a net of his own making. He tried, of course. Men like him always do. He babbled about being stressed, about making mistakes, about not meaning any harm. He even tried to turn it on us, accusing Claire and me of conspiring, of tricking him, of going too far. But every word dug him deeper. And when one of the customers, a woman in her 60s who had been sipping coffee quietly, muttered, "Shameful," loud enough for everyone to hear, I knew the damage was permanent. He left that day in a storm of curses and excuses, but it didn't matter. His reputation was shredded. Claire kicked him out of the house that very night, tossing his clothes into the yard for the neighbors to see. Word spread quickly, as it always does in a small town. He became a joke, a cautionary tale whispered about at barbecues and coffee shops. For me, the aftermath was quieter, but no less profound. He tried to call me a few times, leaving voicemails full of apologies, begging me to give him another chance. I deleted them without listening all the way through. I had no interest in his words anymore. I had already heard enough lies to last a lifetime. Instead, I focused on my bakery, on the smell of bread rising in the ovens, the laughter of regular customers, the simple joy of creating something real, something honest. Claire and I stayed in touch, bonded by the strangest of friendships. Sometimes we'd sit together over a bottle of wine and laugh about the look on his face, replaying the moment like our favorite scene in a movie. And sometimes, late at night, when the bakery was quiet and the world outside was still, I'd think about the song, Mambo No. 5. Once it had been silly background noise, something you'd hear at weddings or parties. But now, to me, it was justice. It was the soundtrack of a liar's downfall, the anthem of two women who refused to stay silent. And me? I learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud to be devastating. Sometimes the sweetest justice is served quietly, patiently, with a smile, like a cake that looks ordinary on the outside, but hides something unforgettable inside.